Hey everybody, this is Ruby as always, and welcome to episode 2 of our RedM C# development series. So last episode we did some pretty cool stuff. We were able to spawn a horse with the coach and get that working. We were able to start and stop scenarios, and we were able to give our player a lasso, binoculars, and a weapon. So this episode I want to move on to something more advanced. Now that I'm filming episode 2, RedM is actually in milestone 2. So some things will be a little bit different as far as setting up a server and then launching it. Like for example, instead of having to download a build from Discord, you just go to redm.gg and download it from their website. And we'll go over the server changes later in this episode. So anyways, what I want to do, and what I always thought was a kind of a fun dynamic in Red Dead 2 was messing with the lawman, right? Whenever you're wanted, they'll come for you and stuff like that. So something that kind of involves some of the more advanced natives would be maybe spawning some of the lawmen and making them come and fight us, stuff like that. So that's what I wanted to take a look at today. So what we'll need to do first is actually set up the event. So for right now, what we'll do is we'll just create a function for it. So in here, right below our main, we'll go ahead and let's create a private static void, and we'll call this law event like that. And this will be our little lawman event. And let's go ahead and register the event for this. So, or I guess register command, and we'll do, I don't know, we'll do /law, and then new action of law event, which is the function that we created just a couple seconds ago. And that'll be good there. So in here we actually want to set up the event, but one of the things we'll need to do is know when things are triggered, because we're going to have to set up a loop event for this. If you guys are following along with the 5M series, you'll be pretty familiar with this. So what we'll need to do is create some new variables up here, and we'll start out with our actual like triggering when the event has been spawned or not. So we'll call this private static bool of event spawned. And we'll set this to false. And down here we'll go ahead and we'll set it to true. And then we can actually start our code. So one of the things we'll need is our player ped ID. So player ped ID. The next thing we'll need to do is grab our player's coordinates. So to do this, instead of doing the native call, let's go ahead and create a function for this, because we're probably going to be using this function a lot in this series. So we'll go over to our util file, and right above our load model one, we're going to go ahead and create a new function. And this is going to return a ped coordinates. And what we'll want to do is just pass it the network handle and return the coordinates. So nice and easy. So we'll do a public static vector3, because this is going to return our position, and we'll call it get ped coords. And then what we want to do is ask it for the network handle, so we'll call ped ID. And one other thing that we can also do and think about is we're always going to usually want to add forward vectors to a position. So one thing that we can do is account for that here. So we'll say int of forward vector, and then we'll default it to 0. And so that way we'll be able to detect if they're passing a forward vector or not. So in here we'll go ahead and we're going to go ahead and grab our ped's position. So it's going to be a vector3, and we'll do the variable name POS for position. And then we want to call the function.call, and then this is going to return a type of a vector3, then hash.get entity coords. And then the only argument we have to pass to it is the actual ped ID that we want to get the coordinates for. So then we could just, return POS here if you didn't want to do the forward vector, but if we will, so if the forward vector is not equal to 0, then what we want to do is go ahead and grab that forward vector. So what we'll do is we'll do a vector3 of forward is equal to function.call for a type of vector3, and then hash.get entity forward vector. And then what we need to pass here is the ped ID as well. So then the next thing we need to do is actually take into account whatever our forward vector is that our player wants to use. So what we'll do here is call the POS for the position that we set up earlier, and then we'll do plus equals, open parentheses, forward times forward vector. And so that way, whatever the player requests, it'll go ahead and do that and add the forward vector to it, and then we'll return POS here. So then we can come back to our main function, and we'll go ahead and actually call this the function we just created. So vector3 POS is equal to get ped coords, and this is wanting the ped ID. So we'll call our player ped ID, and since we're not worried about a forward vector, we'll just leave that alone. So then the next thing we need to do is actually grab where we want to spawn the lawman. So we could just spawn them 5 steps ahead, or we could do 100 of a forward vector. But what if that's like in water or off a cliff? You'd spawn them out in the middle of nowhere. So what we can do is use the vehicle node. So this is something else that we're using in 5M a lot. And what this will do is return, say like the 10th or the 20th or the 50th vehicle node from our player. So that'll get us something that's on a road, and that maybe will look more natural than say them spawning in a forest or something like that. So let's go ahead, and what we need to do to call this is we'll need a couple reference variables, but we'll set those up as we go. So if we call api.getNth closest vehicle node, and you can get with heading or without, it's honestly up to you. We'll get with heading. So then the next thing we need to pass to it for the arguments is the actual position of where you want to fetch the vehicle nodes from. So this is going to be our player's position, since we want it to be relative to that. Then the next parameter it wants is nth closest. So this could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's really up to you. So we'll set this to 25 for now, and we'll maybe have to kind of tweak that a little bit. So the next thing we need to do is actually set up some of these reference variables. So let's just, for now, let's pass our reference type there, and we'll do a spawn POS for the position. Then the next thing it's going to give us is the reference of heading. So we'll call this spawn heading. And then the next one is the unknown variable. So we'll call this ref unc1. And then 0, 0, 0 for these last variables. So up here we'll have to set up these reference variables. So we'll call spawn POS is equal to vector3.0, and then we'll also need to set up our heading. So our spawn heading is equal to 0f, and then the unknown variable can just be 0 like that. And what this will do is then store that vehicle node's position and heading into these two variables here for us, so that we can actually do what we want to do. So the next thing we can do is actually start spawning them, because now we know where we want to spawn them. So you can just write out the code here to spawn them, but we'll create a function for it. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and write that function before we write any of the code for it. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our util class, and we'll come up here above our get ped coords, and we're going to want to create a new function for this. So we'll call this a public async static of a task, and we'll want to actually create a new type for this so we can kind of keep track of everything. So we'll come down here, and let's go ahead and actually create this new class. So we'll call this a public class of lawman, and in here we'll have a public int of, we'll say horse, and get and set, and then we'll have a public int of we'll say ped, so we don't get confusing, and of horse and ped. So this way we'll be able to return, and we'll know exactly who the horse is, who the ped is, and we'll be able to add them to, like, say, a different list and keep track of them and clean them up later. So what we'll do is we'll pass the type of lawman here. So this will expect the task of lawman, which is all right. So then we'll name the function create lawman, and for this we'll need the position of the where we want to spawn him, and then we'll also need the heading of which way we want him facing, and we'll just pass the default value of 0 for that in case we don't maybe have it for some reason, but we will since we set up the function to use with heading. So in here we can go ahead and actually start to create our lawman. So the first thing we'll need is the horse. So what's kind of cool about the horse is that they're actually peds as well, just like the lawman we're going to spawn on him. So the first thing we'll need to do is actually get the horse model. So for this I want to use a couple different random ones just to so that they're not all riding a black horse or all riding the same exact looking horse. So up here we'll create a public static list of string, and we'll name this horse models, and we'll make this new list string, and then go ahead and close it out. And then in here we'll want to put our horse models. So I'll have this linked in the description, but here you can see on modrdr.com we have the ped database, and up here in the search bar you can just type horse, and it will filter you all the different types of horses that there are within Red Dead 2. So that's pretty cool. So for these we'll just want to maybe just grab some of these generic ones like up here, and we'll split the window. Let's go into a new line, and let's, yeah, they're clickable. I don't want to click on them, so we'll just copy and paste these couple right quick. There we go. So that should be random enough for us, honestly. So now that we have our horse models, we can go ahead and set it up. So we'll do horse model is equal to horse models, and we'll need to set up random for this as well. So a private static read only of random equals new random. It's a mouthful. And we'll call our horse models, and then we'll pull up the index of, and then we'll use random.next to get our total count of horses. So that way we'll just get a random horse within the limits of the array. So then the next thing we need to do is actually load the model. So we'll call load model, and then we'll call get hash key of our horse model, and this will get the horse's model loaded for us, which is very important. So then we can actually go ahead and create it. So what this will do is this will return an int. So we'll do int horse is equal to API dot create ped. And if we look at these options here, we're going to need a uint of the model hash, which is the horse model, the position, the heading, and then all of these bools can just be set to true for now. If you don't see these options here, like it's a bunch of integers, what you'll need to do is update your CitizenFX core library and make sure it's all up to date with the latest milestone 2 changes, because this function will not work in the pre-release versions. So anyways, onto the function, we'll typecast it to a uint, and then we'll go ahead and pass our API.getHashKey and our horse model. And then the next thing we need to do is pass our different positions. So pos.x, pos.y, pos.z, then our heading, and then true, 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 true for these booleans. And then that should get us our horse created. So after that, we can go ahead and create the actual lawman that we want to spawn in. But one thing we will have to do that's kind of weird, but we have to call this one native to set the, I believe it's the default component variation, but basically if you don't call this native, the horse won't appear. Like he'll appear for a second and then disappear essentially. So we'll call function.call, and then we'll typecast it to a hash, and then we'll paste this native. I'll have this of course down below for you guys to copy and paste as well. But then we'll pass our horse integer, which is the pet ID, and then true. So after that, that's all good and well. Now the one thing we should do here, but nobody's really figured out yet, is saddles. So since the pedestrian, or since the horse is a pedestrian, sorry, all the different saddles are done through components as well. So kind of as time goes on, we'll figure this out. But for now, that's one thing that's going to be a little bit off about this, is that the horse won't have a saddle. But if you guys know how to spawn a saddle, I'd love to hear it so we can actually update this to be correct. But for now, they'll just be kind of I don't know, I think they call it like roughnecking, I'm not sure, when you don't have a saddle. But anyway, so let's go ahead and load our lawman. So we'll await load model, and then we'll need our API get hash key, and then we need our lawman model. So let's go back to our PED database, and I'm just going to search just law, should be fine. And we'll just want to pick one of these random people. Like here you can see ambient law rural. I just completely had a brain fart. So we'll grab this dispatch guy, because I think these are the guys that might actually get dispatched to you. So yeah, we'll go ahead and paste this here. And then after we have him loaded, we can go ahead and actually create the pet. So what's cool is we actually have a function that will create him mounted on the horse for us. So we'll go ahead and create an int of ped, and this will be our lawman, and we'll call API.create ped on mount. Really easy. So the first thing it wants to know is the int of mount, which is going to be our horse. Then the next thing it wants to know is our pedestrian model. So API.get hash key, and let me just copy and paste this, because that's a lot to type out. And then the next thing is the index. So this should be -1. If you spawn him at 0, he'll actually be on the back of the horse. Like if he was like a buddy riding with you or something like that. Or if like you pick somebody up on the side of the road and we're bringing them to town. So you want -1 for him to actually be driving the horse. If that's what you call it. I don't know if you call it driving or not. I don't really think you drive a horse. And then now that we have this guy, we actually forgot one thing. We'll want a blip for him, because we want to be able to see him coming. So we'll do a public int of blip, and we'll get and set that blip as well. So let's come back up here, and what we'll need to do is, now that we have our pedestrian created, we'll need to go ahead and create the blip. So this will be an integer as well, and this is another copy and paste that we'll have to do. So we'll call function.call, and this is going to be for a type of int. Oops, and then we'll typecast it to hash, and let me copy and paste this native in. And this is the Blip Native that somebody found in the RedM Discord. And then the next thing it wants to know is the actual icon ID, like the Blip sprite ID. So Glitch Detector actually already did a lot of great research on this, and I found this in the Discord. So there's all different kinds of ones, like the gray ones. Whoops, I think I clicked on an ad. A pink enemy, a white. I think this is like whenever you have like a strangers event or something like that. But we can actually search for law, and there's a few lawman ones in here. So we'll just grab this one, and we'll go ahead and use this one, and this will be our blip ID. And then the next thing we need to do is actually pass who we want to attach the blip to. So we'll attach this to our ped, and that's all good there. So after we create the lawman, one other thing we'll want to do, of course, is give him a weapon. So this is pretty easy. We can do, of course, like give weapon to ped or whatever. I believe we need to move that into here, though. I think that's just a function in here. Yeah, there we go. So we'll grab this, and let's move this to our utility class. We'll move it down below here, and then we'll make this a public, so that it can get accessed from the other file. All right, so then we can actually call give weapon to ped, and then it wants to know the ped ID and then the weapon hash. And let's see what kind of pistols. We'll do the Mauser, and that should be good for that. So then we need to just return our lawman type. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll return a new lawman like this. Bring this out onto a new line, and then we want to pass each of our variables in there. So horse is horse, then ped is equal to ped, if I could spell right, and then blip is equal to blip, like so. So then we're all done here, and we'll actually get our lawman created. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's go back over to main, and we can actually continue on with our code. So up here, we'll go ahead, and if we, for example, called create lawman, we could go ahead and do it here. But one thing we'll want to do is spawn a few of them. It doesn't ever just spawn 1 or 2 lawmen to come after you. You know, they spawn quite a few. So one of the things that we can do is do a for loop and just loop over a few times until we get a few of them. So we'll do a for, and then an int of I is equal to 0, and then while this is less than 5, and then we will iterate on I. So basically this will run this code a couple times for us. So what we can go ahead and do is call the int of spawned ped, because we know our lawman is actually going to return a lawman, so we need to return this here. So we'll do this spawned lawman here, and this is going to be equal to await create lawman, and then we need to pass our actual spawn position and our spawn heading. And this needs to be converted to an asynchronous function, so we can do that. So within here, now we have access to all of our different stuff. So one thing we'll want to do is track all of our different horses and pedestrians and blips and stuff like that. So what we'll want to do is come up here and we'll create some private static list of int, and we'll call this horses is equal to a new list of int. And we're going to use these to keep track of our different peds and horses and stuff like that. And then we need blips. So this way, if we want to say get rid of them, we will be able to actually keep track of all of them. So now that we're here, we can go ahead and we can call horses.add spawned lawman. Oops. Dot horse. Oops. Let me actually spell the variable name right. And then we can just copy and paste this a few times, rename this to peds, and rename this to blips, and then we'll name this to ped because that's what we named him in there, and then this one is blip, and then we're all good. So now we'll actually be able to keep track of everybody. So once we have this done, there's a few other things that we'll want to do. For example, if we spawned all of them at this position, they would just spawn on top of each other and like stumble over each other and maybe even fight each other. I'm not sure. It depends on their like natural ped behavior. So what we'll want to do is always add a little bit extra to the spawn position. So to do that, we'll call spawn position and then plus equal, which will add on to the spawn position. And in here, we want to go ahead and create a new function for us. So instead of us having to call the native function, we can just create another helper function, kind of like we did for get ped chords. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So in here, we'll just come down here and we'll see get ped chords, and we can just add something here. So we'll do a public static of vector3, and this is going to be our get entity forward vector function. And for this, we're going to need a ped ID, and then we're also going to want to know how much of a forward vector that we want, so we don't have to do like the multiplication afterwards. So we'll do int forward vector is equal to 1, for example. And in here, we can go ahead and call it. So we'll do a vector3 of forward is equal to function.call for a type of vector3, and then a hash get entity forward vector. And then the only parameter this one needs is the ped ID. So now we have the entity's forward vector, so we can return our forward vector times the amount of forward vector that we actually want. So let's take this and save the file, and we can use this here. So we'll do our spawned lawman .ped and pass him here. And then we need to know our forward vector. So you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a million. Not really. But we'll do 3 because that seems to work well. And this will just get them a few steps ahead of each other so they're not spawning on top of each other. So now that we have this, we'll actually need to give them a task, because if we just left it like so, they would just sit there and just never move. So what we'll want to do is get them to actually go to our entity. And then the first one it wants to know is the actual entity you're doing the task for. So we'll do our spawnedlawman.ped, and then it wants to know the target, which is going to be our player ped ID. Then the duration we'll set to -1. The distance we'll set to 15f. speed 10f, and then these two you can set to 0f and just 0. And this way they'll actually go ahead and come towards our player as soon as they spawn. And then what we'll want to do is set up an event in the tick loop to pick up on when they actually get near our player. So let's come ahead and let's come down here, and below our call from last episode we can go ahead and add this in here, the changes that we'll want to do to kind of pick up whenever they actually get close to our player and stuff like that. So in here we'll want to pick up if our event has spawned or not, or else we don't really want to be doing any kind of calculations that we don't need to be doing. So if the event is spawned, we'll go ahead and we'll grab our player pet ID, and then once we have this we can kind of do whatever we want. So let's see, what we'll need to do is get our player's coordinates, because we want to know where the pedestrians are and where our player's at. So we'll call a vector3 of player pos for player position, and then you can get entity chords this way, or if you wanted to use the function we created earlier, you can get ped chords, and you don't have to deal with all the extra functions. And you also have the forward vector helper here. So for here we'll pass our player pet ID, and we don't want any forward vector, so we'll leave that alone. And now that we have this, we need to know whether or not the lawmen have got up to us yet. So up here we'll need to create a new bool. So we'll create a private static bool of event on scene, and we'll set this to false. And then let me copy this variable, and then down here in our actual loop function we'll use this. So if event on scene, then what we want to do is we want to go through each of our lawmen and see if any of them are close to us yet. So for each int ped in peds, and this is the list of pedestrians we created earlier. And so for each of those pedestrians we want to go through and get all of their different coordinates and see how far they are away from our player. So we'll call this a vector3 of ped pos, and we'll call get ped chords of ped, because I just like using my own functions. So then we'll need our float of distance, because we want to calculate how far away they are. So we'll do api.get distance between chords, and this one wants the two different pairs of vector3s. So we'll call our pedpos.x, our pedpos.y, or pedpos.z, and then we'll pass our playerpos.x, our player pos.y, player pos.z, and then use z, we'll say true, because we definitely want to worry about altitude. So if they are, let's say, less than 20 meters away from us, what we want to do is call event on scene to true, so we know that we've actually triggered this. And then once they are actually on scene, we want to go ahead and trigger all of them to combat the ped. So we can once again go through the peds in peds, and then api.task combat ped, and then the first one is the spawn ped player ped ID, so that this will make the actual lawman attack our player. And then for these we'll pass 0 and 16. This is just something I picked up from 5M. So this way, basically as the tick goes on every second, we'll need to set that up as well. But then we'll need to basically check each ped. Then as soon as it detects one of them's close, it'll go ahead and loop back through all of them again, and set all of them to combat the actual player. So that's all good. So what we can do now is actually go ahead and add on, because we don't want this to run probably every tick. What we'll want to do is add our little game timer to this. So up here, let's go ahead and create a private static int of gtimer, and we'll do if api.getGameTimer minus gtimer is greater than equal to 500, because this we kind of want to run maybe more than once a second, so that they don't like run up to us and stand for like half a second and then fight us, you know. Then we'll want to set gtimer is equal to api.getGameTimer, and then we can call this code here. So let's grab this right here. Also, you could just make a loop function like we typically do. So let's grab this and let's just do it that way. Let's make a loop function. Whoops, that's no thank you, Visual Studio. It tried to be a helpful friend there and didn't really do much. Alright, so we'll create a new private static void of loop, and we'll just paste in our code here, and then we'll reference it here by calling loop. So this way, about every half a second or so, it'll go ahead and check to whether or not they're actually on scene with us or not. So now that we have this done, we can go ahead and we'll double check our function, and we have everything with like the register command working. The next thing we need to do is actually set up the deregister event. So this is what happens whenever we want them to go away, for example. So we'll come down here and we'll go ahead and we'll create a new private, it doesn't need to be async, sorry, private static void of deregister. And in here we'll set event on scene to false, and then we'll say event spawned is false, just to reset these flags, or else it'll always think they're on scene or something like that. So then we want to do for each int horse in horses, then you'll want to add int href is equal to horse, because for api.delete entity you have to pass it a reference variable like that. So this is what you'll want to do for each of them. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste this real quick. And then this will be ped, and then this will be blip, and then this will be blips, this will be peds, this will be ped. And then the blip one is just remove blip. And then that'll get rid of the blip. So let's change this to bref and pref. Of course, this is just me being a little overbearing maybe. But let's see, pref, ped, pref, and we're removing because these are both entities, so we'll delete them with the same function. Then remove blip, and we've got that all good. So cool. So we can register this as a function if we wanted. So api.register command, we'll say log by, because they're going bye bye whenever we call that function. And then we will call deregister and false. And then one other thing we can do is always pick up whenever like our player dies, for example, because then the lawman would go away. So we can do that in our loop, for example. So if our event is spawned, then we'll come down here between these two, because we're going to need to know who our player is. And then we'll need to go ahead and create a new flag for this. So let's go ahead and come back up here and private static bool of event despawned. And so this way we'll be able to tell if we've started the deregistering process, basically. So if we haven't started to despawn the event, and we'll do api.getEntityHealth, get entity health, make sure it's not max health, and then you'll want to pass your player pet ID here. And then if this is equal to 0, so this way if the event hasn't been despawned yet and the player's health is 0, we want to go ahead and event despawned set to true. Whoops, forgot the equal sign there. And then we want to await base script .delay for about 2,000 milliseconds. We'll need to change this to async, of course. And this will give us enough time to go through the death animation and then despawn them where we really can't see it happen that well. So then we'll call deregister here, and this will get that taken care of for us. So now that we have all of this done, we can actually go ahead and hop into game and see how everything goes. Let's go ahead and do a quick build real quick, make sure we didn't miss anything, any errors or mistakes. Make sure everything builds well, because Sometimes I forget to check. So after you have your plugin built, you'll need to go ahead and set up the server. And like I said earlier, some things have changed for Milestone 2. So for example, you'll have to use just a regular 5M server. So if you come over to the setting up a server, I'll have this link down in the description. You'll want to go ahead and just grab the regular 5M build. And what's pretty cool is that they now have the recommended build up here that you can grab. And you'll want to set this up. It's very similar to 5M, how you set everything up. So a lot of the custom setup that we did for the last episode, you don't have to do. You just have to set up the new server. Alright, so here we are in the game, right outside of Valentine. So I wanted to go ahead and test out this script. That's when I was rolling up on us. So anyways, we made the command /law, and we'll go ahead and test it out. And oh, here they come. So yeah, they're pretty mad at us, I'd say. Oh, yep. And we respawn back here. So we can test it out again and see how it goes. Yeah, they're pretty mad. If only we'd given ourselves a weapon. So we can do /law by, and they're all gone. So we know our deregister command works fine. Let's actually give ourselves kind of a chance here, hey? So we can actually maybe kill some of them. Oh, no, he still got me. Well, it was worth a shot. And, yeah, oh well. It is what it is. So we can tell them to get lost if we want. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed. And if you have any ideas for the next episode, let me know. I'm going to be doing a little bit of research on some stuff that's working in the new Milestone 2. Kind of like how we saw Create Ped works now. So yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Hopefully you're enjoying running from the law now in your own 5M server. But I want to make this a little bit better, maybe like some deliveries and stuff like that you can do. I've got to figure out the waypoints. The waypoints don't really seem to be figured out yet, so we'll kind of see. But anyways, until next time, guys, I hope you have enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Oh. Okay. Oh.